There's a stretch of desert in Kazakhstan where thousands of stone spheres, some the size of a car, sit scattered across what used to be an ancient seafloor, and several of them have cracked open to reveal cores that look nothing like the rock around them. There's a dry lakebed in Death Valley, where stones heavy enough to need several people to lift them travel across the surface, with no animal, vehicle, or person ever pushing them, carving long, curving grooves into the mud as they go. There's a stretch of ocean off Mauritius, where the seafloor drops so suddenly that from above, it looks like the water itself is pouring into a hole in the planet. None of these are illustrations. None of them are generated. They're real coordinates, studied by real geologists. And even with modern equipment, several of them still don't have a complete explanation. Let's get into it. Torish stone spheres, Kazakhstan. Walking across the Mangistau steppe in western Kazakhstan means walking across the floor of an ancient ocean, one that evaporated roughly 120 million years ago. Scattered across that dry seabed are thousands of stone spheres, some smooth, nearly perfectly round, and large enough to rival the size of a small car. Geologists explain them as concretions, formed as minerals slowly accumulated around a sediment core, hardening over millions of years into these smooth, self-contained shapes. What makes them genuinely strange is what's inside. Several of the spheres have cracked open over time, revealing interior cores with colors and textures completely different from their outer shell, as if two entirely separate types of rock had been sealed inside one another. At dusk, when the light lies low across the steppe, the shadows of these spheres stretch out across the empty ground, turning a stretch of Kazakhstan's desert into something that looks less like geology and more like a landscape that was arranged on purpose. It wasn't. Racetrack Playa, Death Valley. In the middle of Death Valley, one of the hottest places on Earth, there's a dry lakebed where stones heavy enough to require several people to lift them travel across the surface with nobody pushing them, carving long, curving grooves into the mud that can run for the length of several football fields. Some stones even turn mid-path or move in parallel lines, as though something were guiding each one in coordination with the others. For decades, no one witnessed the movement directly happening. The current scientific explanation, confirmed through direct observation and time-lapse research published by planetary scientist Ralph Lorenz and colleagues, is that a rare combination of conditions makes it possible. A thin sheet of ice forms after infrequent rain, then breaks apart into large floating panels that light wind can push across the surface, carrying the rocks embedded within it. The genuinely strange part isn't that it happens. It's that it requires an unlikely, precise sequence of rain, freezing temperatures, and wind, all arriving in one of the driest, hottest environments on the planet, conditions that rarely align at all, yet somehow still produce this reliably enough that the tracks keep appearing, year after year. 7 Giants of Man. Pupunur, Russia. On a frozen plateau north of Russia's Ural Mountains, 7 stone pillars rise as high as 138 feet, standing completely alone, with no other structures anywhere near them. Geologically, they're formed from quartzite schist, among the hardest rock types that exist. The surviving cores left behind after more than 200 million years of continuous erosion wore away everything softer around them. That erosion process is also what gave them their unusual shape: swollen, heavy tops sitting on narrower bases, a proportion that shouldn't, by most intuition, remain standing at all. When strong winds move through the gaps in the rock, they produce a long, whistling sound, audible from a significant distance, on a plateau so remote and so empty that the sound carries with almost nothing to interrupt it. Standing among them today, the pillars remain exactly what centuries of erosion left behind. Geology alone, on a scale that makes the surrounding land feel genuinely forgotten. Underwater waterfall illusion, Mauritius. Off the southwestern coast of Mauritius, there's a stretch of ocean that, from directly above, looks like it's tearing itself apart. A dark abyss plunging nearly 13,000 feet, as though the sea could swallow anything passing over it. What's actually happening is a shift in the seafloor itself. A shallow continental shelf suddenly drops into an extremely deep underwater canyon, and what appears to be water pouring into the void is actually sand, mud, and sediment being swept over that steep edge by ocean currents. The constant motion of that sediment is what creates the visual, a slow, continuous slide that makes the ocean floor look like it's collapsing in real time, even though the process has likely been running, quietly, for a very long period of geological time. From a boat on the surface, none of it is visible at all. It only reveals itself from directly above, a landform that exists entirely out of sight of anyone standing near it. Vinicunca Rainbow Mountain, Peru. At roughly 17,000 feet in the Andes of Peru, Vinicunca sits striped in bands of red, yellow, and turquoise. A mountain that looks, from a distance, as though it had been painted by hand. It hadn't been visible for most of recorded history. Ice and snow covered the mountainside for thousands of years, and the coloring only became clearly exposed as regional temperatures warmed enough to melt back the covering. The colors themselves come from ancient sediment layers, lifted to the surface by tectonic activity over millions of years. Iron oxide producing the reds, sulfur producing the yellows, and copper minerals contributing the turquoise. The mountain's appearance shifts constantly with the light, vivid under direct sun, fading quickly when fog moves across the slope. Behind that surreal appearance is a genuinely harsh environment. Thin air, strong winds, and an elevation that leaves most visitors short of breath within minutes of arriving. A landscape that spent most of human history completely hidden, only becoming visible as the ice that had concealed it slowly disappeared. Nica Crystal Cave, Mexico. Nearly 1,000 feet beneath the Mexican desert, there's a cave filled with translucent gypsum crystals that reach 121,000 pounds at their heaviest. Beams of stone crisscrossing the chamber from floor to ceiling, some large enough that a person standing beside one looks genuinely small. Despite the crystalline, almost frozen appearance, the cave itself is close to unbearable, temperatures reaching 136 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity so high that sweat barely evaporates from the skin. The crystals took an estimated 500,000 years to grow, forming inside groundwater that was heated, continuously, by a magma chamber sitting directly below the cave. Researchers studying the site, including microbiologist Penelope Boston, identified bacteria trapped inside fluid pockets within the crystals themselves, organisms that had survived, dormant, for tens of thousands of years, sealed away from the outside world completely. Today, the cave has been deliberately flooded again, closing off access to preserve it, meaning one of the most extreme crystal formations ever discovered on the planet now sits, once more, completely out of reach. Lake Kandy, Kazakhstan. At roughly 6,500 feet in the mountains of southeastern Kazakhstan, Lake Kandy simply wasn't there before 1911. That year, a powerful earthquake shook the region hard enough to bring down an entire hillside, burying the canyon floor in rock and debris and blocking its natural drainage, turning the valley into a basin that filled with water almost immediately, drowning a pine forest that had been standing there almost instantly. The trunks of those trees are still standing today, rising directly out of the water, bare and gray above the surface, while the submerged sections remain covered in moss and algae, preserved by water that rarely rises above 43 degrees Fahrenheit, even in summer. That cold is what has kept the wood from fully decaying for over a century. A forest that technically drowned in a matter of hours, but has spent more than 100 years since barely decomposing at all. The lake's water carries a distinctive turquoise color, clear enough in places to reveal depths of nearly 100 feet, due to dissolved minerals carried down by the same landslide that created the lake in the first place. Reaching it still requires travel along rugged mountain roads, through isolated canyons and pine forest, a landscape that looks, on the surface, completely undisturbed, sitting directly above a forest that never got the chance to finish dying. Haukadalur Geothermal Valley, Iceland. Every language that uses the word geyser is borrowing it, directly or indirectly, from a single valley in Iceland. Haukadalur is the site of Geyser itself, the geothermal formation that gave its name to every erupting hot spring on the planet. At its peak activity, Geyser could blast water columns roughly 550 feet into the air. Today, it sits mostly dormant, in a state strongly influenced by seismic activity. A single earthquake can seal an active vent or wake a pool that had been completely silent for centuries. In the vents that remain active, water is pulled downward just before eruption, swelling into a glassy turquoise dome in the instant before it explodes upward. Some of the springs in the valley split into two contrasting sections, one side clear and boiling, the other cold and cloudy, colored by dissolved minerals. Locals have long used the valley's hidden geothermal heat for something far more practical than eruptions, burying pots of rye dough directly in the hot mud and letting the ground itself bake the bread over 24 hours, using heat that's been rising from beneath this valley for longer than anyone has been recording it. Fairy chimneys and underground cities, Turkey. Across the Anatolian plateau of central Turkey, tens of thousands of rock formations stand with wide caps balanced on narrow pillars. Fairy chimneys, shaped over millions of years as wind and water eroded soft volcanic ash, leaving harder basalt layers standing on top, acting as a protective roof for the softer stone underneath. But the formations above ground are only part of what makes this region remarkable. Beneath the surface, a network of underground cities reaches depths of up to 279 feet. Tunnels and chambers that tens of thousands of people once used as shelter during periods of invasion, descending below ground for weeks at a time, with ventilation shafts, storage rooms, and water systems engineered directly into the rock. Some of those cities remain accessible today, winding downward through levels that were carved entirely by hand, without any of the machinery that would make the same excavation straightforward now. Standing at the surface, among the cone-shaped rock spires, there's no visible sign of what lies beneath, an entire underground world, built specifically to disappear completely from anyone looking down from above. Son Doong Cave, Vietnam. In central Vietnam, there's a cave large enough that a section of its main passage could comfortably contain a 40-story skyscraper. Son Doong is the largest known natural cave on Earth, formed as an underground river eroded through limestone over an extended geological period, carving out chambers wide enough and tall enough to develop conditions that don't exist anywhere else underground. In sections where the cave ceiling collapsed entirely, massive sinkholes opened directly to the surface, allowing sunlight to cut through the cave's permanent mist and reach the floor below. That light, combined with moisture from the underground river, has been enough to sustain an isolated section of primary forest growing inside the cave itself, with tree canopies rising over 100 feet toward the opening far above them. Inside the enclosed chambers, water vapor continues condensing into low clouds, drifting beneath the limestone ceiling as though the cave had developed a weather system entirely its own. Because the internal route is so complex, and the number of permitted visitors each year is so limited, fewer people have made it into the deepest sections of Son Doong than have stood on the summit of Everest, a cave so large that reaching the bottom of it remains rarer than reaching the top of the world's tallest mountain. 10 landforms, thousands of stone spheres scattered across the floor of a sea that dried up 120 million years ago. Rocks that slide across a desert floor with no one touching them. Stone pillars 200 million years in the making, still whistling when the wind moves through them. An ocean floor that looks, from above, like it's collapsing into itself. A mountain that stayed hidden under ice until the climate finally revealed it. Crystals the size of tree trunks that took 500,000 years to grow in total darkness. A forest an earthquake drowned in a single day, still barely decayed more than a century later. A valley that gave the entire world the word for an erupting hot spring. An underground city, built to disappear completely beneath the rock above it. And a cave so large it grows its own weather, and its own forest, underneath the surface of the earth. Every one of these places has already been measured, studied, and explained as far as current science allows. And every one of them still leaves something standing there that doesn't fully add up.